The Tender Witch, Chapter 3, The Dirigible, West. I woke with a pain in my chest, and rain pouring straight to the earth from high lofty clouds. The landscape was a blur of faded colors. I sat cross-legged, with the quilts bundled over my shoulders, and smudged a hole of clarity into the glass with the palm of my hand. The water was running off the cliffs. The ocean marine was all foam and black swirls of upset waves. I breathed out the aching in my chest and head, clouding the window again before I left the bed, and resolved to dress. The rain was incessant and gray, with the green of the fields sopping wet under puddles and little streams. Flowers disappeared in the downpour. I could not hear whether they bid me good morning as I brought my bags to the door. On the wood porch was a small pile of entrails, a little bulging sack of intestines strewn alongside a mouse's head, just the head, and a little cold red heart. I sighed. This wasn't the work of any proud cat. The letter may not have been a hoax, I hoped, but it seemed I had been visited in the night, again, by one, if not many, snickering children. Suddenly I could not wait to be out of town. I could only hope the house wouldn't be vandalized further. I thought to use the head as some demented effigy on the front door to spook the vandals if they decided to come back. But that wasn't me. And to see the poor thing sickened me. I picked up the offering, the insult, and carried it off to the yard with a trowel and buried it sadly in the soft dirt where many other little innocents were buried over the years. The rain pattered on the short brim of my hat as the wind chimes clanged about the porch posts. I stood up and returned to the porch to say goodbye. Having not left this old house in over a decade, a goodbye felt necessary. I pressed my hand to the iron plate of the door and stepped back. I wondered if houses had their own hearts, but maybe that is a strange thought from a strange woman. I locked my front door in a town where no one really need lock their doors from neighbors. I left my things behind, the kitchen and the garden and the hearth, the writing desk, and the tree marking my father's grave up on the hill, and the newly formed bird nest tucked into the porch roof. I felt completely detached. Looking blankly at the cliff, feet on the weathered doormat, my body and self seemed to float like a paper boat, being swept away, off and down to the bottom of the ocean's icy currents. The mist swirled about my feet. It wanted to pull me onwards. I thought of falling a harmless fall. A cold sensation. I blinked. A drip had dropped from the roof down my chest. A back-shivering cold sat in my stomach. It was time to go. I decided to take an umbrella today, the wood cane and cream one with my mother's initials. The road would be long through town. Would it rain as much in Floundering? I secretly hoped. The rain was cold, but its sound was company, and the touch of it kept me grounded, spoke confidence into my soul. My morning walk was much the same, which came as a surprise. I admit I had expected a speaker or two to be waiting for me, to forbid me from leaving. But the fence between me and the cliff was its ever-aged self, the cobbles still wet and the snails slinking under the grass. There were 3 magpies waiting, fluffing themselves and not minding me, since I was usual company on the morning road. They were more preoccupied with the snails, dark and round like striped conkers. It was a melancholy scene, but I passed the sign to town feeling unusually calm, like I had made the right choice in going. I passed the tavern without much thought to go inside, and the market stalls burdened with water and neighborhood tenants, but my chest grew lighter the further I walked. I didn't see any jeering children so long before their school bells. It was almost too calm, and good to know that no one had a mind to stop me from doing something rash or out of my ordinary. Too calm. It was just beyond the east edge of town that I saw a building through the rain. It was plated in storm slats, standing alone by a lengthy platform, above the meadows and silhouetted by a stormy sky. There was a slight crowd there, a gathered flock under the station's roof, waiting with diminishing patience for the train to arrive. I picked a hurried pace out of town and stumbled through the small fenced field. On reaching the platform steps, I huddled on the fringe of the group with my suitcase in one hand, my handbag draped over my shoulder, and my smallish umbrella tucked to the side to slight the rain spilling off the roof. The ticket and letter from Mrs. Langston were nestled in my breast coat pocket. A couple ahead of me was pressed between a younger gentleman, an elderly woman, and two twin sisters I recognized from the academy who blinked away from my direction. The couple began bickering amongst themselves about the spongy condition of their socks. They must not have been from North End. We waited in a wet and grumbly fashion for several minutes before the station hand exited from the building, clad in a green overcoat and leather cap. His white gloves were uncommonly spotless, and he politely began to ask for tickets near the door, slowly allowing the crowd to drift towards the warmth carried out from inside the station. I saw wood benches line the walls inside, and strings of lanterns lit the room with a yellow brilliance. On the far wall was a mural of the Isle, decorated with train routes, joining the largest and most remote of cities. Though it lacked an artistic touch, looking on it provoked my existential imagination. How far would I be willing to go after allowing myself this brief expedition of freedom? How far to find some peace? To feel something? "Miss?" The station hand urged me forward as I straggled by the window. "Excuse me, pardons, sir." I fumbled for the ticket, my handbag slipping, the umbrella under my arm soaked the side of my coat. "There's no rush, miss. Departing for Port Floundering, yes?" He was a middle-aged man. The stain on his smile and crow's feet told me as much, but he spoke with manners. From his willingness to smile at me, I gathered he'd never met me before. I gratefully passed him my ticket. "Yes, sir, thank you." He punched a hole for my departure and handed the ticket back to me. I promptly replaced it before straightening out my bags and holstering the umbrella on the crook of my arm. "Be sure to keep hold of that ticket until your arrival in the next station," he said, and held the door for me as I shuffled inside, nodding with a bashful smile. I was a terrible wreck when it came to strangers. It had been a long while since I'd had any proof of it, having not gone any place or humored anybody outside of my little circle. There were few places open on the benches. Many people had gone to stand beside a grand fireplace in one corner, under another mantle of vigilance, carved with the words, discipline, patience, perseverance. I ignored them all and their cursory glances, and set myself down, laboriously organizing my belongings on the empty space next to me. A fuzzy veil seemed to cover the room. The voices of awaiting people bled together, sounding unlike any language. I sat rigidly and watched the many mouths move. I could not remember the last time I'd boarded the trains. I swung my feet from the bench. It wasn't until many anxious minutes had passed that a quiet whirring grew nearer from outside. From the window I saw the train incoming. Boisterous blue blimps, tied in caravan style, hovered closer to the platform, like a line of flying carriages, led by one colossal engine. The intense, heart-pounding sound of the rear and side propellers stunned me where I sat, and it descended from the northeast sky softly, smoothly, dreamlike. I barely remembered such machines as a child, and rarely glimpsed them flying over town, through the rain. It was tall as a whaling ship, with its balloons strung up and reined in like storm clouds. Welded into the side of the first passenger car was her name, Proud Piper. I gathered my things, enchanted, while other passengers aggressively made for the door and back into the downpour. The station hand waved a flag all which ways as the train slowed and came to rest. As metal screeched on metal, the beast sat heaving steam from its belly and brain. I moved outside, standing with mouth half gaping, as people stepped out from the train cars with their luggage of past travels. They headed in the direction of town with hands clasping tight the buttons on their stiff tweed coats, after giving their tickets to the station hand for punching. The small crowd from the station fidgeted in the rain as their socks grew spongier. Each of them was ready to dash upon the train cars and cozy into what I hoped were inviting compartments. The station hand turned to us all as we huddled there, shabby and shaking with morning briskness. According to the letter grouping on your tickets, I will now advise everyone going aboard to recount their belongings and attend to their correct car. The train will be prepared to depart by the end of the current hour, at which time all passengers must be situated. Now, everyone, thank you for your patience. If you need assistance with luggage, please do just ask." But at that point, most of the crowd had picked up their cases and purses and pressed on towards the train, ignoring the man. I felt a twinge of indecency and paused by the hand, offering my smile. He paused, too, to say, "Vigilance, bless your travels, miss," before he hurried to help the bickering couple with a case. I boarded the fourth car, stepping onto the slick, canopied walkway precariously attached to the outer wall. I could only imagine what it would feel like to walk the outside of these cars in the midst of a storm, and I doubted the thin iron railing would be of much use if the wind wanted to shake hands with anyone. Through the car door, the inside was hot, and the walls were trimmed with wood and pasted with appealing paper. I passed down the slim hallway, past a line of windows spattered with raindrops, and located my little bunk in the center of the car. An agitated man behind me continued to sigh and lean his shoulder into the wall as I worked to turn the lock on my door. I didn't look to him, feeling myself redden. I had just unclicked the lock and was pushing the door open, but I must have taken too long. The man hurriedly pressed past me, and his suitcases bumped my heels. It happened too quickly for me to exert a surprised, "Excuse me." I shut the door, dropping my heavy bags on the floor with a thump, and stood with my back pressed hard to the door frame. I bit my lip and locked the door, nudging my suitcase under the bed cot. And then I sat on the mattress, courage crushed, and was prepared to have dust spray up from the depressed sheets. Iron coat rungs hung from the wall. A small vent in the ceiling leaked a faint warmth. A side table nailed to the floor held a glass vase with one drooping calla lily, the snipped stem and leaf idle and slowly wilting. I would be stuck in this box for a day before we'd reach Floundering. No chirruping sounds of green finches reached me through the train's walls, but it was too late to turn back now. The room wobbled. Looking out my little porthole, I saw the platform waver in the rain as the car swayed inches from the ground. I sat nervous in my compartment, awaiting the ascent until the excited squeals of the two schoolgirls I had seen at the station crossed the threshold of my door. I heard a hissing of pressure as their sound faded into the outside and opened my own door, curious, despite my lack of an adventurer's spirit, to know why any sane soul would let the rain in. Seeing they had vanished from the car, I left my quarters. There was too much water streaming on the window panes to see, though the sensation of floating was enough to inform me that we were undoubtedly rising in this bizarre machine. A bout of nausea overcame my stomach and knees as I struggled to watch the ground fall slowly behind us, the train horn blaring into the sky. For a moment the world twisted itself around, up for down. I held tight to the window frame and made my way to the car door in defiance of myself. I left my home to be brave, hadn't I? Isn't that what I'd set out to do? I wanted to live up to her name, to prove it was a good one. I made it to the car door and pulled hard on the handle. The same hissing sound whistled around my feet and through my hair. Gusts of wind violently pulled me towards the outside, and I burst forward, clutching the handle of the door, holding myself tightly to it on the outside of the train, with my feet firmly planted on the railed walkway. My eyes I closed instinctually like two storm hatches. But above the wind and torrents of rain, I heard laughter and giddy joy. I opened my eyes, amazed, and saw the two girls giggling in their matching violet wool coats. They were leaning over the rail and tasting the rain like deluded sprites with no comprehension of what falling could be or how it might feel to land splatted on the ground. It was so far beneath us now. My grip loosened, and I couldn't help but stare as the rain flitted under the awning and soaked into my shoes. One of the girls paused to look at me. Cordelia Quimby was her name. She looked taken aback, but transformed her surprise into a friendly greeting. "You're Eloise, aren't you? Eloise Wayward. You were several years above us at the academy." Her small voice shouted into the wind, and I went to her side, stumbling like a child, pushed onward by the gales. I grasped at the railing, a sudden fear striking into my heart. "You know the taking off is the best part." "It's stunning." I was too preoccupied with breathing to say more. The wind and air stripped all sense of control I tried to retain, and my lungs tightened, empty. She let forth a stream of laughter. Whether for joy or at my expense, I didn't know, though I was accustomed to the latter. I'm sure I looked terrified, not of the height, but of falling, surely. "Is this strictly allowed?" I managed to say. "Who knows? But the view, I think, is worth it," her sister said beside her. Cornelia. And the two of them leaned over the railing to catch water drops in their hair, risking the loss of their pretty cloche hats. Be brave, I told myself. One brave step at a time. One forced intake of breath left my eyes open to the whole of the world. Though the wind raked at my coat and skirt and at my hair, and whipped my skin with wet splinters of rain, I mustered to look over the edge and away from the clouds engulfing us. North End lay in the near distance, growing smaller, surrounded by a sea of lush grasses and hills. It was a lonely mound of houses and fields, the only town for many miles. My house was only a subtle dot, with its windmill on the cliffs, and it was not long before we passed it, and it fell away into the rain. The cliffs along the shoreline towered over the deep maw of the ocean as if to be swallowed. I felt my body flying, sauntering over the land. I was moving skyward in an unknown and drastic direction, but a smile tugged at my cheeks. For that moment, the sickness and stress escaped my body. I would have said something to the wind, expressed some long-lost feeling of inspiration, were I alone there and not under the scrutiny of these girls. I liked to think it was what my mother loved so much about living here, a realized feeling which sprung from the earth. It was the feeling of freedom which the world imprinted on me. For the rest of the afternoon and evening, after a scolding from one of the train's attendants, the two sisters, Cordelia and Cornelia, hailed me from my room to join them in the dining car for tea. It seemed harmless enough. The two of them knew of me, certainly, but outside of town and away from the eyes of prying guardians, it seemed they were more open to being seen in my company. The windows were humid from the constant passion of passengers' discourse, and painted seabirds decorated the walls. I could no longer see clearly the outlines of clouds through the window's blurry glass. But I sat, comfortable, on the sticky tan leather of our table booth facing the two. Our porcelain cups rested on their saucers, blowing steam. Cordelia sat across from me with Cornelia, and both of them were content to share with me their reason for traveling beyond town. It was all very lightsome, until the subject of gossip took a sinister turn. Apparently, the Quimbys had caught wind of the happenings inland, and as a result, the girls' parents were persuaded to send them to study in Port Floundering. I didn't know what had caught their interest. I wasn't welcome at the newsstand, and knew nothing that Stacy wasn't inclined to share with me from her tenants. "Have you heard what was found at Sherman's dairy south of town?" is how Cornelia began. "One of his poor cows died in the field one night, maybe a week ago, in the frost. Wandered too far from the fence, and probably got caught in a ditch, who knows? Next morning, Mr. Sherman sees the same cow walking about and chewing weeds with a jaw half thawed, running into the fence as if death hadn't put its greedy mitts on the creature. Frost and all, Sherman walked the cow to the butcher, who said it was cursed. Not a heartbeat in the thing, no decay on the body, just like magic. Wouldn't take it off Sherman's for a single slim." Cornelia took sips of her tea in between, looking incredulous, while I nodded, my mouth slightly agape. These rumors were new to my ears, if not comparatively outlandish to the usual gab about who stole whose prized chicken. Cordelia continued where Cornelia left off. "Well, there's more than just that. Earlier this spring, I heard pastures outside of Jordan's quarry turned to near dust overnight, and it's not as if there's any shortage of rain. And then, before that, in winter, sometime after Good News Eve and right in the middle of the season festival, I heard a man walked clear out of a grave. To think they buried him alive to begin. And then poof, he walks out of the grave, croaking like a swamp toad, and I mean really croaking, and collapses in the Hickory town square. The crowd beat his bones to powder in a panic. What a festival to mark the papers. He was dead the second time they buried him, you can be sure, but just picture the fright he gave his wife, lumbering around, eyes clear as a newborn's. You'd think there'd have been a maggot or two at least, but nothing. They're saying it all began with the disappearance of some widow in the South. She was the first to go. So sad. With things like this, we don't dare stay in North End. Not with what happened to Mr. Sherman. That was only some miles from our parents' acreage. It sounds like a string of disasters. You're not playing with me. I hadn't been teased for my wild fancies in many years, frankly, because I'd avoided the people who would turn to making a joke of me. But Cornelia's hands betrayed her concern as if she'd seen the corpse of the poor cow walking up the aisles of North End herself, though I highly doubted that could have been the case. Still, her nails clinked on the side of her porcelain cup with a nervous tittering as Cordelia, the more adamant of the two, spoke again. Of course not. I mean, not to be rude, Miss Eloise, but I've heard tell of you. I thought you'd more easily believe us than the town crier did when he heard the news. The crier refused to put stock in the tales before Sherman threatened to leave the cow on his doorstep. Brave man, Mr. Sherman, putting the truth of things straight. Why would any of this be easy to believe? I don't follow you. Considering your history, I mean. Of course. I should have known a conversation of this nature would lead down the road of personal belligerence. It was as if Cordelia couldn't stave off the restless glinting of her eye that dug into mine with an active fascination. But I had to humor her until she grew bored of me and my lack of spectacle interest. She would see I was as average could be, as plain as any other North Ender, though the speakers would tell everyone otherwise. I wonder what could have caused such things as much as you, I'm sure. Be civilized, self. Don't let her see you for something you're not. Cornelia spoke up again with a renewed vigor. I heard it's a hag, she hissed. Nellie! Cordelia cleared her throat to hush her sister as I held my breath, my chest constricting. A head turned behind us with a shifting of leather and the silence that accompanies a cup of tea, whose spoon has stopped its whisking. Pardon, Cornelia blinked nervously. I know it's silly to say. Cordelia turned to me. I held tight to my own hand beneath the table, the feeling of my mother's ring familiar but suddenly uncomfortable. If the High Speaker has said the hags are extinct, then extinct they must be. All talk of hags aside, Cordelia said with a gentle nudge on Cornelia's arm. It seems like you're leaving town as well. All for the better. So it would seem, I said. Floundering should be safer with the presence of the three guilds. I don't know a soul that would prefer to stay in North End and have the dead come wandering over from the fields. Cordelia, you didn't see these happenings for yourself, did you? My throat was parched. The words were catching in it, though I tried to sound calm. As far as I can tell with a level head, there's an explanation somewhere for all the odd things happening. It's not as if anything of this kind has been heard of before. Nothing cheats death. I wanted to put forth a laugh, the kind that signifies a light heart, but I wasn't known for any convincing ability to lie. I remained on the cusp of a stolid grimace. Oh, I have faith in vigilance. There's an explanation, Miss Eloise, but... Cordelia tilted her cheek to the window, still looking intently at my face. I'm inclined to believe that with so many unsavory goings-on, a person like you wouldn't hesitate to question what is and isn't possible. Not to say I know you. Again, I mean no offense, of course. But I would have thought you were the one who cursed that cow if I hadn't met you here on this very train. To your credit, you're not quite hag material, now that I finally meet you. The infamous wayward hag child. I think you wouldn't have lasted so long if you were a hag. It's only practical, then, leaving town before the crowds get spooked on good Sherman's behalf. They haven't called the seekers from Floundering to enact a trial yet, have they? That would be exciting. At this, Cordelia smiled a relishing smile, while Cornelia, fearing I could be what her sister said I was, shied away from my eyes. Only when the stoic paleness of my cheeks disappointed Cordelia's attempts to aggravate me did her smile twitch and fail. She was a fool of a girl. Just a girl. A foul girl with foul words and no hold on me. I wanted to lean forward and bare my teeth and dare her to call me a hag again. I'm sure I could have contrived enough gibberish to mimic a curse. Not that I'd ever heard one before, but I knew myself to be a coward. And the room was quiet. It contained a suffocating stillness. Every noise of clinking spoons or paper brushing on paper resounded 10 times to strike my ears, and strike in me a fear of saying anything at all to this impertinent but determined Hector. She did not hold me, but she held power. She continued with the tiniest of scowls, no less dissuaded by my impassive exterior from speaking. "Anyways," Cordelia said, "Vigilance has given no answers thus far. The speakers provided no explanations as of the last town service. They were quite literally at a loss for words. First that string of missing persons in the last hunt. Now the dead are rising. The curses are becoming worse and worse, and I thought we'd rid the land of hags." Even in the absent way she twirled a piece of her hair, Cordelia looked at me as if I had answers to give, to confirm her and the town's suspicions of me more than to explain the situation with Mr. Sherman. I still refused to flinch, even as the stinking cold of sweat crawled along the small of my back. I framed my voice to be as poised as possible given the compulsive jittering of my insides. "By no means would I be involved in a plot like that," I said. "If I may be bold enough to speak for myself, I certainly have no knowledge of hagcraft. Be that as it may, I've heard of people west of North End and how they combat epidemics of hags and calamities. Even a lack of worship is all anyone requires to deem a person like you guilty enough for slander at the least, if not a drowning. And I don't believe I've ever seen you answer the speaker's call at the chapel. It's suspicious enough to see you leaving town, and just when all the gossip is turning to rumors of hags. Well, I'm sure even a hag must be tired of being called a hag, no? I wouldn't stay in town either if I were you." Cornelia coughed, her turn to quiet her sister, and the mild reminder of maintaining her civility brought Cordelia out of her staring. "Forgive me. I'm such a sport for gossip. I'm aware this probably hasn't been the most usual of conversations. You've been a charm." I nodded, perturbed by her dismissal. Cornelia cut in, attempting to break the tension which had been settling in the air of the car. More heads had taken some moments to turn to us. "Perhaps we'll be lucky to share your company in the city, where we can leave this silly hag business behind us. I was silly to mention it, wasn't I, Cordelia?" Cornelia's weak smile was empty of any resolve. She surely was scared the rumors were true, and more scared, it seemed, should she have to suffer another minute at the table across from me. It was better that way, to rid each of ourselves of the other's company. Cordelia was insufferable. I'd forgotten, too, since leaving the academy, how horrid people could be. "I'm sure you'll find Floundering to be a good place to escape all these evil tidings," Cornelia added, as if to appease me should I think of weaving a curse for her. "Lucky. Yes, I'm sure it will be an experience to remember." I sighed. "Thank you both for the tea." Cordelia looked out the window where the rain tapped on the glass. Satisfaction relaxed the peaks of her smile. "With as little light as there is, they must be serving supper soon. We'll take our leave now, so we'll be wishing you a good and quiet night." "Then I'll thank you for the company," I said. "Come on, Nellie." The exchange was made up of all of the illusion that makes a convincing stage play. They both left with a slight bow, Cornelia's more apologetic, Cordelia's more reserved, and they headed out of the dining car and presumably back to their own room. They left their tea saucers on the table, and I was left to myself. I finished my tea, attempting to ignore the other bodies in the room. I leaned back in my seat to keep my feet from rapping the floor, hands still clenched. The train continued to sway and bother my insides, while the winds pushed hard on the window, slamming sheets of rain on the thick glass. What a horrible girl. And what horrible things to say. More horrible still to revel in the game of sadistic despotism she'd imposed on my otherwise unimpeded afternoon. And here I thought this adventuring forth out of town could be easy after all. Foolhardy me, then, for daring to hope. I got up, unnerved at being indoors and trapped, and brought the balanced cups and saucers to the bar where a burly man took the cups and stayed a moment to look at me. I begged it wasn't any manifestation of helplessness that he saw in my face. "You needn't bring the cups. I have a boy in the other car for that." "It's no trouble," I said. I had been maiden at a tavern too many years to lose the habit. But the barman stared only at my hairline, not at my face. Abashed, I pulled the messy locks back behind my ear and adjusted my hairpins as he turned to his counter. "It's blustery beyond the beastie's walls," he said knowingly. "Water?" "Yes, please, thank you." The barman readied a glass. But before I could step away, he placed an elbow on the counter. His voice was quiet. Not that a man cares to admit he's listened to any private tidings, but the car is small. I won't pretend to be ignorant of what I hear. You may want to listen to those girls' words. If you're to Floundering, or anywhere west of the Shady Lake, no matter your leaning, it doesn't matter to me. You'd best keep it more private than it's been here today. The barman nodded to a man sitting behind me in a cap and collared shirt, who in turn swiveled his attention away from me. The formal hunts may have been retired, but people never know when a hag might turn up out of the country. It riles them. Innocents do get caught up in the riots, and pardon the phrase, but you certainly don't look a hag to me, miss. A gnarled pit formed in my gut like a tangle of stingwood roots digging into my softer flesh. My idea of luck was fading. My lip quivered against all of my discipline. I felt it shake like a poppy in the wind. Best to keep to myself, then. His eyes were sad, tortured with memories of hunts I'm sure I had not been alive to see, before he blinked away the subject and resumed wiping away at his glasses. He nodded and smiled at a man who had just entered the car with a hiss of the door. "Enjoy your night, miss. Those looked like two upstanding girls you were with, but you never know who boards the trains. Not all upstanding folk." "Right," I murmured. Anyone could tell the Speakers Guild of my history, of my family. Cordelia could if she wanted, or Darren if my rejection displeased him. Even children thought it a duty most entertaining to sniff out the supposed hags which might be wandering the markets and doing their grocery rounds like any other soul. It was tragic to think of how many of those souls were indeed innocent, and how many were children themselves, talking to the wind or the flowers as children do. I did not want to think of it. I did not want to be one of them, one of the condemned. In the deepest corner of my heart, I knew I had cheated death as a child. I left the car with stiff knees and headed for my own. This was why I didn't travel, be it beyond the town, the tavern, my house. Some days I did not wish to leave my bed. I'd forgotten the scathing looks, having evaded them for so many years now, out of a sheer devotion to living a mundane and routine life. I'd been a shadow in town for years. I made myself unnoticeable, otherwise charitable when I was called on by Stacy and her guests at the tavern. I molded myself into a perfectly amicable person to meet in the street, pretended I didn't have a past. I could blame the people of North End for being my constant reminder. Would it affect me so? These underhanded comments of hags if I wasn't so frightfully aware that the world thought I was one of them. Gods, I thought them all fools for believing in magic's curses. Belief in magic had never brought me any wonder, only pain. Maybe in a city where I was nothing but a stranger, these rumors would grow old and pass me over, and no one in North End would consider that I had any part to play in them. I hadn't, couldn't hurt a soul. Not human, not creature, not the land itself. It's not what she taught me. I nearly tripped on the threshold of the next car and stopped to take a breath. I was too involved in my own head. I wanted to stop everything, but knew that to survive I had to go forward. I'd been stuck in North End my entire life, by choice, granted. Forbid I stay there when the slightest rumor could set the speakers upon me. I righted myself in my water glass as I saw a younger man materialize from the room next to mine with his eyes cast down. I held my glass to my chest. I waited for him to pass me so I might approach my lock and be out of his way, but he stood still. The smallest frown sat atop his right cheek, and he leaned his shoulder on his closed door. "I won't keep you. Please, go on." The words felt awkward as I smiled through my teeth. He met me with a sigh and looked down. He wasn't familiar to me, and I didn't know his face from town, but since listening to Cordelia's berating voice, it felt that I should expect every face to be charged with daggers and stones and slurs. "No, please," he said. "Take your time. I'm in no rush." I detected no dose of malice, though his posture was tense. I opened my mouth to insist, but with a broad stroke of his hand, he motioned to my lock. "Thank you." I whispered the words, self-conscious of his watching my hand turn each knob of my mother's ring, and my neck hung down, suddenly feeling as if I shouldn't have said anything at all. Keep to myself on this train was the thought, that it'd be more polite not to bother anyone, and safer. The lock unclicked, and I said another louder, "Thank you," as I hid behind my door, and he brushed past with an air of composure I was utterly devoid of. I set my glass on the side table and laid down on my stomach atop the sheets, my head turned to the calla lily with its one petal draped round, like an antique gown expended of its bright color and shape. It sat in a dim spotlight cast by the little portal window, looking sad. Its one decorative leaf was half brown with death. Its yellowed water sent sparkling lights around the room. My eyes fluttered, and my chest throbbed under my weight. I twisted my mother's ring as it tightened snugly around my finger. I wanted to cry. But something passed by the window, a trick of lightning in the distance. I sat up and saw it again, a flash. Small and precise, it twirled in the rain. Wings spread and feathers ruffled with ethereal light. I thought I heard a voice in the rain, as I had heard my mother's name on the wind in the meadow. I sprung to the window and blinked, blanket falling from the bed beneath me. The bird was gone again. It was the bird, I knew it, but it was gone. Another thing without explanation. I laid back down, slowly. This trip was rattling my cage in more ways than one. I don't know how long I sat there fixating on the flower and listening to the rain with some hope I'd wake up with a homemade quilt wrapped around the whole of my body, the whole affair with Cordelia scratched out of memory. My candle had burned to darkness when a gentle knocking breached my door. Ridiculously still in my coat and shoes, I stood drowsy and imagining myself still in bed at the cottage in North End, my senses and fears dulled by the quiet of the night. I opened the door to see a well-tailored boy with a tray of chicken gravy and some simmered vegetables. He held it out with purpose while I rubbed my eyes in the candlelight of the hallway. "Car 3? He moved the tray towards me. I took the tray from his outstretched arms, breathing in the hunger whose urgency I'd abused. I could feel the stirring in my stomach, a stirring distinct from my anxieties, and the boy went away quickly, busy with other things. I then sat, after locking the door, and finished the meal, rolling the food around and cleaning my plate. I took my time to soak up the solitude and did not fail to notice a note fall to the tray from the underside of the plate. "The hunts are never over." I relit the candle lamp attached to the wall, but the glow could afford me little comfort. I tore the note in a dazed fit of nervous contemplation. I burned the pieces one by one. Countless deaths of snatching hags had been orchestrated by the hands of their neighbors during the hunts. This note was either a warning or a threat. When I landed in a city as vast as Floundering, who could I trust? Even with my practiced art of social invisibility, my inconsequential presence in a city of thousands, would anyone dare to question where I'd come from, who I was? There was nothing to discover about me which would stain me guilty, except by association. That alone was the grim notion. Could I be? Would I be prosecuted without proof for the crimes of a generation of hags which had already been punished to the depths? Hundreds of drowned bodies littered the ocean floor, shackled by heavy stones, left to be devoured by murky creatures of the waves. No, my mind had begun to spin too fast again. The rumors had only just reached North End. Floundering had done away with their last hunt years past. No hags had been publicly executed since then. And, I thought, I would not be alone there. Mrs. Langston at least could be my anchor and refuge for the few days I would be in Floundering. And even then, why should I worry about rumors which did not concern me? If I wanted to embrace a normal life, a nice life, without burdens or worries beyond gathering weekly groceries and tending herb boxes and watching the finches outside the window before dawn, then I would have to choke down and swallow this fear before it ruined me. Mrs. Langston, a woman of repute, wouldn't dream of inviting a hag to her house. I finished the glass of water and laid myself down. In the dark, I became aware of the automations of the machines that made the train and held it fast together to spite the storm. Creaking joints and clanging metal reverberated through the bones of the cars. The storm of rain sent my thoughts to wander, but I didn't see the bird again. Whatever dream I'd had for the rest of that night was plunging, as if I had thrown myself from the train car to fall through the sky. I slammed my head into the wall with a yelp and fell reeling from my cot, knees clacking together against the wood floor. I fell the way we do in beds in rooms which are not our own, where dreams of dark places become especially dreadful. I forgot where I was before grumbling on the floor and sat up shivering, drawing the thin bed sheet over my face to ward off the bright light above my head. Though I was too tired to relate to the nausea in my belly, I knew the train was steadily descending. We'd be back on the ground soon at Port Floundering Station. The lingering sense of nightly cold touched at my skin, my neck, and I stood to explore the porthole. A thick fog had overtaken the cliffs below, but the signs of nightly rain had cleared. Looking out on the hills, there was little to distinguish it from home, except for the ghastly chrome color of the grass. My face still slept with apathy. I could return to North End as soon as the rumors fell to dust, like all of the other gossip. Maybe on returning I could live a more fulfilling life, one that better honored her, one she would have wished me to have. She'd thought I'd make a good painter once, like my father, or a good medicine maid or a groundskeeper. That was the hope at least, but far in the past it seemed. Perhaps too ideal, given the state of my world. I was born into a world that did not want me, I thought grimly. But at least I did not mind manning a broom in the dark and empty rooms of the Stony Toad. Below, the station was in view. Down towards the grand glass hangar the dirigible went. Every panel reflected stray light flares, with the flashing brightness of sunlight in the whites of one's eyes, and the whole of its monumental frame was held firm by rusty metal beams.